All right, let us begin. Good morning, good afternoon to all. Thank you very much for joining us today for this webinar on WASH Triple Nexus, Building Resilience and Sustainability in Disaster-Prone and Fragile Contexts. This is coming right after the Stockholm World Water Week, which really the main theme was resilience, and we heard quite a bit about it. And this is really some follow-up work where we just really get to unpack a bit the issue of building resilience and sustainability in WASH, in disaster-prone and fragile contexts, but also hearing from our various speakers on the different experiences. Now, this is an upcoming area or an emerging area where we're seeing a lot of the development partners, civil society organizations. Somebody muted me, sorry. A closer look at these particular issues. This session is hosted by Sanitation and Water for All, GWC, and the German WASH Network. And I forgot to introduce myself, which has become quite common lately. And my name is Serene Malik, and I'm the Executive Secretary of the African Civil Society Network for Water and Sanitation and the Vice Chair for Sanitation and Water for All. Now, what is the purpose of this session and having you here today? It's really to first, as mentioned, generate global support to upscale the humanitarian development and peace nexus in water insecure, disaster-prone and fragile and climate-affected context, provide an evidence-based framework for WASH policymakers and practitioners to operationalize the WASH Triple Nexus, and provide practical case studies that support the WASH Triple Nexus framework to demonstrate really how do we operationalize core principles of collaboration, inclusion, risk reduction, accountability, strengthening national systems, and doing no harm. Now, from a SWA point of view, this is an area as well that we are actually entering into and have already started quite a bit of work, particularly in what would be called fragile context or fragile countries. So we do have humanitarian and WASH Nexus type of interventions that are taking place, for example, in DRC, in Central African Republic, and which builds, of course, on the current topic of climate change, protecting development investments through resilience. So this is really in terms of the work that has been happening a bit within the background and a bit within the various countries, using, of course, multi-stakeholder partnership approaches, facilitating really to have all the stakeholders and shareholders really at the table while we build this. So without further ado, I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that we are recording. So if you are not comfortable, we will have to bid you farewell. Otherwise, you are welcome to this session for the next 1 hour and a half. Tino, if we could just have the agenda, a quick overview. So we're going to hear from Jeffrey Goldberg in a minute, Tim Griever, Martina Rama, Dr. Kalis Tindimugaya, Elsa Cervellon, and then we'll get into the discussion and Q&A, which will be facilitated by Thilo, and finally concluding on this session. I'd like to invite Thilo, yes, for some housekeeping rules. Thilo, over to you.
Thank you so much, Serene. Let's see that we get my video on. Hope you can see me in a second. Yes, welcome to all of you also from my side. I'm just trying yeah, obviously we're on Zoom. I think many people are aware. We ask everyone to keep at present your camera off and your microphones muted, which I think everyone's doing, so that's excellent. Later for our interactive discussion, of course, we will encourage you to do the opposite and to turn it on. I'll let you know when the time comes. You are able to change your name and organization. If you hover over your picture and go on the 3 dots that are behind your name, you can help everyone know which organization you are from. And I will quickly explain, as we're about to go into a whole round of speeches and presentations, and we do want to capture your questions for later. I will quickly explain to you which tool we will be using and how this will work. You should see on your slide, on your screen now, a URL at the top that you can visit, so sli.do. And you can do this either in another window, ideally on another device, on your phone, for example, or another mobile device. And here you can enter a code to come into this event discussion. That would be TNW, like you see at the top, Triple Nexus WASH, yeah, TNW. And then basically we take control of your mobile device, because on the screen you will see on the top this headline, WASH Triple Nexus, and you will be asked to perhaps make a statement that you want concerning drivers and barriers of the Nexus. We will use this later for our discussion, so it's good if all of you log on at this point. We will also be using the same, so don't be confused by the heading, we will be using the same also for you to type your questions. So as you're listening to our speakers, if you have a question directed at all speakers, write at all. If it's directed at one of the speakers, say at and then the name. And please type your question in here. Later, when I facilitate the discussion, you will see there's a possibility for participants, so for you also, to like certain ideas or questions by giving them a thumbs up, which makes it possible for me to later steer the direction in the direction that you would like to see it go. And you will also see that there's a possibility if someone else makes a statement, for example, there, that you can reply, and so we can actually get small discussion streams even going between you. So we'd encourage you to use that tool to log on and to post your questions there so that we can pick those up later. That would be it from my side. Serene, back over to you.
Thank you, Thilo. If you need any clarifications, please DM Thilo through your chat, just in the event it's not clear. Okay, so for our opening remarks, it's my pleasure to invite Jeff Goldberg, who's the director for USAID's Center for Water Security, Sanitation and Hygiene, with global responsibilities for coordinating the agency's water and sanitation related foreign assistance. Jeff has also provided technical leadership on WASH programming through Sub-Saharan Africa, South and Southeast Asia, and Latin America, and manages agency-wide efforts to implement the US Global Water Strategy. So Jeff is going to give us really highlight USAID's involvement in the Triple Nexus, and also giving a bit of a feel through the recent Haiti earthquake to see how does TNW work. So Jeff, good morning and over to you.
Thanks so much for the warm welcome, Serene, and big thank you to SWA, the Global WASH Cluster, German WASH Network, UNICEF, and others for the invitation to kick off today's event on the WASH Triple Nexus Joint Operational Framework. I am personally incredibly happy to be here, as this topic could not be more important right now. Serene mentioned Haiti, which I'll speak a little bit about, but just to kick off more broadly, at USAID, we recognize that some 80% of the places where the agency works are in some form of acute crisis, recovering from disaster or experiencing smaller scale upheaval. And because of this, increasing collaboration and coherence between humanitarian, peace, and development WASH programming is a huge priority for USAID and our new administrator. We know that the average humanitarian crisis now lasts more than 9 years, and the duration of displacement, either externally as a refugee or as an internally displaced person, averages between 17 and 20 years. So in order to strengthen sustainable WASH services and water resources management programming within these complex environments, we know that more deliberate and purposeful coordination is required across relief, development, and peace activities. More resilient and responsive approaches to WASH and water resources management programming are vital to prevent excess mortality, minimize disruptions in WASH service delivery or negative environmental impacts, particularly in countries affected by shock, so natural disasters, conflict, and political instability that exceed government's capacity to respond. So I'm excited to kick us off and talk about how we're trying to move the needle in terms of our own work at the heart of this nexus at USAID. So we're doing a couple things, and I'll just offer these up, and very excited to hear the contributions from others, because this really takes all of us to be able to do this. But in an organization as large and complex as USAID, we are trying to move a couple of critical actions forward. So firstly, at headquarters, we're trying to develop a common understanding of the mandate, priorities, and geographic areas where each of our main funding streams, by that we mean humanitarian, development, and conflict prevention funds, are supporting WASH and water resources management. This may sound like a small start, but it's an important one, as I'm sure you all can appreciate. Secondly, we're working with colleagues who specialize in WASH humanitarian response and conflict to develop technical guidance on greater coherence in programming within the Triple Nexus. I'm very pleased to announce that we recently finalized this WASH and humanitarian and development coherence technical brief, and it's available on our knowledge platform, globalwaters.org, and is included in the handouts for this event. In it, we highlight a number of different ways across WASH and water resources management that humanitarians and development actors can pursue complementary or fully integrated approaches in shock-affected areas. Thirdly, we're also trying to fund more concretely efforts that either embrace these complementary or integrated approaches, or that look to provide coordination services through backbone support entities. So by way of example, in Nigeria, we funded UNICEF to start bringing humanitarian and development WASH actors together that are operating in the country's northwest. And in that setting, leading a collaborative WASH stakeholder mapping exercise through facilitated workshops has enabled us to understand who is working where and with what mandate. And with that information, we've started convening quarterly coordination meetings with relevant stakeholders, building upon that mapping exercise to focus on scenario planning, joint work planning, and implementation. So again, these sound like simple steps, but it's that active coordination of really knowing who's working where and bringing everybody together for coherent, coordinated approaches. And as Serene mentioned at the top of the meeting, at this very moment in Haiti, we are striving to put these principles into practice. By kind of pure happenstance, our development WASH programming has been working in Lakai and Jeremy, the areas affected by the recent devastating earthquake, and has rapidly been able to pivot to conduct damage assessments and to restore water services for emergency use. We are actively seeking to leverage this geographic co-location of our development programming to systematically share information from our development side of the house with our Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance through participation in platforms that we heretofore have not participated in on the emergency side of our house. So that includes our disaster assistance response team on the ground in Haiti and our response management team that coordinates here in DC as well. So by collaborating early and often in this setting, we are seeking to maximize complementarities, avoid duplication, and accelerate the path to recovery. These are but small examples, but they're definitely a start in a complex environment and one that we hope to build off in years ahead with all of you. We are very hopeful that through events like this, our sector, including critical global coordination platforms like our hosts, SWA and the Global WASH Cluster among them, will more fully embrace the Triple Nexus principles to advance our collective sector outcomes. So I'm very much looking forward to today's discussion about how many of us are operationalizing elements of the Triple Nexus framework already and how we can collectively take this important work forward. So again, big thank you and looking forward to the conversation to come, and back over to you, Serene.
Thank you very much, Jeff, for that very clear, concise and precise presentation and the examples that you've given us really on the ground of how how does TNW actually play out? Please start putting in your questions in the chat box if you have any, so that they can be picked up as well by Tilo and the Slido application. So my next speaker, I have a pleasure to introduce Tim Grieve, that's going to give us input on the Triple Nexus Joint Operating Framework. Now, Tim is a seasoned expert, 20 years of experience with a career that spanned 15 years in the UN in several missions across Africa, Middle East, and Asia. Recently, as a UNICEF senior advisor, Tim leads the UNICEF's Global Humanitarian WASH program, and he's currently consulting on humanitarian development and peace initiatives for the WASH sector. So without further ado, Tim, over to you.
Thank you very much, Serene, for the warm introduction. And I'd like to also take this opportunity to thank the many WASH specialists across humanitarian and development, and also the peace actors. There's more than 40 of you who contributed to this framework, and also the participants in a number of working and learning workshops that we've held throughout the year that have led to the evolution of the framework. And I think it fits in nicely with what Jeff was explaining in terms of USAID's policy and other donor banks and global policy here. So firstly, next slide, please. I'll start the Triple Nexus off with a pitch. Why are we doing the Triple Nexus? We'll look at the framework and we'll cover the vision, collective outcomes, and ways of working from an operational and a programmatic perspective. Next slide. So the WASH Triple Nexus is a WASH solution in challenging places. These are places that are prone to humanitarian crisis and climate change. The siloed approach is not working. The business as usual is not working. Humanitarian programs are overstretched and development partners are struggling to achieve the SDGs. For example, in fragile contexts, it will require 23 times more effort to achieve the SDGs for drinking water. So the Triple Nexus is an approach to improve this situation. It's an approach that brings together humanitarian and development actors and, where possible, peace actors. It's a coordinated approach, it's a coherent approach, and it's a complementary approach. And it also brings together multiple stakeholders, NGOs, government, private sector, UN, and research and learning and others. Next slide, please. So the framework, there are three main components of the framework. We have the 2030 vision, we have the collective outcomes. These are the outcomes that we want to achieve across humanitarian and development actors and, where possible, with peace. And also the ways of working, and these are the approaches to achieve the Triple Nexus approach. I think an important point to note that this is compatible with WASH building blocks, whatever configuration or whichever ones your organization is highlighting or using, and whatever tools and approaches you're using. It's supposed to guide in-country policymakers and practitioners in a practical way, in a practical and simple way. The programming level is also at the policymaker level. It's directed at the service delivery level, and of course at the community or any configuration. Next slide. The 2030 vision. Now this is to align with the 2030 SDG agenda, and it's for resilient and sustainable WASH services for all. So leaving no one behind, ensuring that all vulnerable groups are included, always, so both in and out of emergency and everywhere. So ensuring that we're also targeting those challenging places to deliver WASH services. Next slide, please. So the collective outcomes, so these are the outcomes we want to achieve across humanitarian and development, and again, where possible with peace. The first is resilient WASH services based on, one, prevention, and here we're trying to prevent or at least mitigate any WASH-related disaster risks. The second one is to is preparedness, which is institutionalizing knowledge and capacity to better prepare for emergency responses over the long term. The third is, again, this institutionalizing knowledge and capacity to effectively transition in and out of emergencies wherever they may be occurring in the country and move back into recovery and development. The second is inclusion. So inclusive WASH services, ensuring we include all vulnerable groups and we leave no one behind. Sustainability is the third. So it's about protecting the SDG gains where possible, and where possible to make progress. So here we're encouraging and engaging development workers to stay longer during challenging crisis. The fourth is an optional peace-building collective outcome, and this is to build peace through WASH. So using WASH as a vehicle to contribute to peace, and this is where development is possible and where there's sufficient capacity. Next slide, please. The ways of working. So these are the approaches, and core to the ways of working are a solid coordination structure that could either be an existing structure, and I think Jeff mentioned a structure in Northeast Nigeria where they've been able to coordinate across humanitarian and development. It's a structure that requires a common language so it's understood across all actors. There's program coherence to ensure that across the collaboration and across program that there's a unified approach, and that there's complementarity, that we're drawing from the strengths of all actors, and we're not collaborating just for the sake of collaboration. Next, please. So we can divide the ways of working into the operational side, and next I'll talk about the programmatic side. So the operational side are really, it's more about the collaboration itself. And the first one is to bring together comparative strengths of each actor, and this is about the complementarity side to it. The second is to base the level of collaboration on trust and move towards higher levels of collaboration as trust is built. And we have a great presentation from Burkina Faso that's going to elaborate on that further. The third, which draws on coherence and complementarity, is to foster joint action. And this is at the assessment phase, it's during planning, it's during analysis, it's throughout the program itself, and monitoring. The fourth is to use an adaptive management approach. And this is to take real-time data to make well-informed decisions that match the volatility of the situation so that you can move in and out and transition in and out of the different phases of emergency and development, recovery, and so forth. Next slide, please. So the ways of working, or the approaches from a programmatic perspective, the first is to apply a risk-informed and conflict-sensitive approach. And here we're not being prescriptive about which tool is used. It could be an environmental and social assessment tool or others, but the main point is that it's multi-risk. The risks that will contribute to derailing WASH services in a country. The last four are building on SWA's collaborative behaviours, which are very much, and we've tweaked those to make it part of the WASH Triple Nexus approach. So enhancing government leadership and political will, especially under sovereign governments, and also we're encouraging this in environments where there are non-state actors, where this is possible. The third is to strengthen national WASH systems and markets, and this is to really leverage the localization agenda, and we have a great example from Uganda, where they were able to strengthen national utilities to absorb refugee populations. The fourth is to use one information and mutual accountability platform across humanitarian and development. We have another great presentation coming from Honduras, where they were able to use pre-existing vulnerabilities, and they mapped the typhoon over the top of these to better target vulnerable groups, and then also build a resilience program in behind that. Fifth is to build flexible and sustainable financing strategies. And here, this is as we move in and out of these different phases, that there are sufficient funds to be able to follow the program and adapt to those changes in the program. It's also to leverage long-term financing and funding into these challenging environments that are humanitarian prone and climate change prone, etc. Moving on to the next slide, which is the final slide. So in summary, if your organization's, whatever organizational building blocks you're using to improve the WASH sector, or tools or approaches, the WASH Triple Nexus is a framework that can fit, that is compatible with each of these. We've talked about the key ways of working, which are the approaches from an operational or collaborative perspective, and also from a programmatic perspective. And these will lead to collective outcomes of resilience, inclusion, and sustainability, and peace building as an option, and ultimately lead to the WASH Triple Nexus vision. Thank you. Over to you, Serene.
Thank you very much, Tim, and definitely, and thank you for the overview. So complementarity, coherence, and collaboration. So I think really everything that works around that. And the collective outcomes: resilience, inclusion, sustainability, and peace building. Notice, Tim, that you put optional in brackets, but we can have a discussion on that. Thank you very much, Tim. So I'd like now to introduce Martina Rama, who's going to give us a case study from Burkina Faso. So she's a WASH cluster coordinator in Burkina Faso, providing leadership in the humanitarian coordination in the WASH sector. So Martina has experience in the UN and consulting across humanitarian and development in sub-Saharan Africa. Martina is going to run us through really thinking back to the ways of working that Tim just outlined, and will provide us with insights from Burkina Faso as to how the level of triple nexus collaboration could be increased as trust is built between actors. And Martina, we gladly welcome you. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Serene. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. It's a big pleasure for me to be here with you today. So I will bring some experience from Burkina Faso, where I've been working for the last 2 years as a WASH cluster coordinator. Next slide, please. So the context in Burkina Faso is the context of a recent and quickly deteriorating crisis. So it was a country that was considered very stable and peaceful for a long time, but very suddenly the crisis came, and very quickly it covered a huge part of the territory. And this crisis has been overlapping with pre-existing very low levels of service in terms of access to water and sanitation. So there has been a massive displacement of population throughout all 2019. We've had more than 20% additional ATPs every month, and the rhythm has been slowed down a little bit in 2020, but still in 2021, but it is still going on. And we have now more than 1.2 million displaced people in Burkina, which is more than 6% of the population. So this creates really massive needs in WASH, because the displaced people are actually, most of them are hosted in existing towns and cities. And basically they share the same infrastructure with their host communities. And the access rates were very low before the crisis, and have been actually decreasing even more due to this massive arrival of displaced people in the same areas. So we've had approximately a 20% decrease in access rates to water in most of the affected towns. So this actually shows that the country has been stepping backwards in terms of SDGs. And this year, we estimate more than 2.5 million people in need of humanitarian WASH assistance. Next slide, please. So why do we need a nexus approach in this context? So we have a few challenges, of course, many challenges, but we also have many opportunities. And the opportunity is really this overlapping of structural and conjunctural problems. And we have also geographical convergence. So the same intervention areas of humanitarian stakeholders and development stakeholders that were in the country before the crisis. And so we have WASH development actors that are many, well established in the country, that have a good knowledge of the context. They have quite a significant budget. There is a donor coordination in place. There is an operational and committed Ministry of Water. So they have a lot of comparative advantages. But at the same time, they don't have the expertise and the rapidity to act in a crisis. And on the other side, we have the WASH humanitarian actors. They are fewer, they are recently arrived in the country, but they're flexible and they have specific expertise for emergency. And they have also better access to insecure areas. At the same time, they don't have the expertise, the time, and they don't have the mandate and the funding to address all the structural problems that were there before. So this really shows that the two types of stakeholders are complementary and they really need to work together in order to address the challenges of the WASH sector. Next slide, please. So the vision we have in Burkina Faso of the Nexus is that we see it as a stairways in which we have progressive collaboration between these different stakeholders based on increasing level of trust. So the first step of the stairways is really to have networking and information exchange and contact, communication between the two different stakeholders. So we really encourage to have meetings with humanitarian actors and development actors talking to each other to explain what are they doing, each one of them in the same areas, so that we have this information exchange, which is very important. For example, we have the WASH cluster that participates in WASH development donor meetings. We have also the coordination of the WASH cluster that has been opened to all the development NGOs. And we have also the norms that the technical norms that we are putting in place that are transitional norms. So they're in between the sphere emergency norms and the government norms. So they're a sort of compromise between the two stakeholders. Then the second step in the stairways is coordination, which means really start to do some tasks sharing, really make the complementarity play. So for example, in some areas, we have first water tracking, which is after taken over by water point construction. We also have some networks which need rehabilitation, but at the same time need expansion. So we try to find a complementarity. So development actors will do the expansion part and emergency actors will do the rehabilitation parts of the works, for example. Then the further step upwards is cooperation, which means really getting closer, being flexible, taking over each other's projects. For example, we have the public utility, which is taking over some water points built by UNICEF in Kaya. And then the fourth step, which is really a good nexus integration and collaboration, is, for example, joint or mixed interventions, where the two category of actors, development and humanitarian, will really build a project together. So this is like the theoretical stairways, and we really have examples at each level of the stairway. I'll go more into detail of two examples now. Very quickly, since I've seen my time is almost over, sorry. So the first is about the WASH cluster advocacy with development donors. So we've been really discussing a lot with development donors in order to have them fund also the emergency affected areas. And thanks to this advocacy work, with the development donors and the government, we managed to gain a lot of funding that was development funding, but has also been used to fit the displaced people and at the same time the host communities. Next slide, please. So this is the example in the stairways. For example, the fact that we exchanged together, we participated in the meetings. So it led to this taking over of UNICEF Water Point in Kaya by the public utility. So it shows how we are actually moving upwards in the stairways. Next slide, please. So the example of Jibo network is the one I mentioned about the network rehabilitation expansion. We have 4 different stakeholders, 2 development actors and 2 humanitarian actors that are really getting together in order to work on the Jibo network. Next slide, please. So this also sees how we can move forward in the network as trust is built between the stakeholders. So at the beginning, it's just really sharing tasks. I do this, you do that. And later on, the same actors are actually building a Nexus project together in another town. So it shows that as they get to know each other and the trust is built, so they can really move forward in the Nexus. Next slide, please. So to conclude, the Nexus collaboration, to establish this Nexus, trust is very important. So we need to move forward from low levels of collaboration to higher levels based on this trust, which is built between different category of stakeholders. And we all have a common objective, which is to respond to immediate needs while at the same time contributing to the SDGs. We also agree on common values, which are localization, accountability, quality, human rights. So we have to try to focus on the values that we have in common and not on the things that tear us apart. We have to recognize and make the most of the complementarities. We have to increase flexible resource mobilization, and we have to strengthen government capacity for emergency preparedness and response. So that was my conclusion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Martina, for that. That was brilliant. And thank you for giving us a visual, really, of how we have, yes, WASH development actors on one side and WASH humanitarian actors on one side, and using the stepwise approach with the key ingredient of trust to come to some sort of Nexus approach and collaboration. So thank you really for giving us a live example, and that it is possible. We can do this. My next speaker is Dr. Caliste Tindimugaya from Uganda. Pleasure to have you here, Commissioner for Integrated Water Resources Management for the Ministry of Water and Environment in Uganda, and has been part of the team responsible for establishing sustainable WASH systems in refugee settlements. So Dr. Tindimugaya has been key in ensuring that groundwater resources are developed and managed in an integrated manner for sustainable water supply. So today he will take us on a journey to Uganda and provide us with an example of strengthening national systems to include refugees. So thank you, and over to you, Dr. Tindimugaya.
Thank you very much, Serene, for the introductions. I would like to start by thanking the organizers for giving us the opportunity to share what we have been doing in Uganda and how we have strengthened WASH systems for refugees and host communities. The work we have been doing, we have collaborated very, very closely with UNHCR, and I have my colleague David online who will also respond to any question that may come up. We are, of course, also trying to highlight how the WASH Triple Nexus has actually been operationalized in Uganda. Next. For Uganda, Uganda is one of the countries that is hosting refugees. We have about 1.5 million refugees hosted in the various parts of the country, in 12 districts. And these refugees live alongside with Ugandan nationals. So previously, humanitarian partners would focus on providing WASH services to refugees, while the development partners will focus on providing WASH services to the Ugandan nationals. And oftentimes we would find conflicts that in some situations, the refugees would get better services than the nationals, and then we would have conflicts. And of course, also as a government, we had left most of the work in refugee settlements to UNHCR, while for us as the ministry in charge of WASH services, we would focus on the nationals that are living alongside the refugees. So we realized that we need to harmonize our approaches. We need to bring the humanitarian partners to work with the development partners within an organized framework so that we can offer services to both the refugees and host communities. We made an effort as a country to ensure that the refugees are integrated in the national WASH systems. We developed a water and environment sector response plan, basically trying to see how we respond to the issues affecting refugees and host communities. And this plan was developed collaboratively by various partners, both humanitarian and development partners. We developed a secretariat that is moving implementation of this plan forward within the Ministry of Water and Environment. And the Ministry of Water and Environment is taking leadership in operationalizing this plan and ensuring that all the partners are brought together on board. We have thus established a nexus between the humanitarian and development approaches, and this is enabling us to leverage on capacities and resources within the development and humanitarian partners so that we can provide sustainable services for both the refugees and host communities. As a result, WASH services are now currently provided by national utilities and NGOs. Previously, we had uncoordinated frameworks. A development partner puts in place a WASH service, a facility, but then operation and maintenance becomes a problem. But right now, all of these are being operated and managed by national utilities in collaboration with the refugees, with the NGOs. Next. So to operationalize this, we have put in place a coordination mechanism. At a national level, we have been having a sector working group where all the partners working in WASH are brought together, but unfortunately, humanitarian development partners were not actually part of this working group. But we have opened it up to make sure that all partners are represented there, where we discuss WASH issues at the strategic level and ensure that the plans and strategies by all partners are harmonized. But we have specifically under that overall working group, we have created a specific subgroup on refugees and host communities. And this one is looking at the issues on how we can provide those services for refugees and the host communities in those fragile environments. And this is helping to coordinate also the efforts by the development partners and the humanitarian agencies. And specifically, humanitarian WASH meetings are held at both the national level and the district level so that, again, we can get the partners together. We hold meetings on a quarterly basis. And when we hold these meetings, we review plans of each other, we review the resources available, and all of us come together, plan ahead for provision of these services. And worth noting is that we are not only looking at WASH, but we are also looking at how we can sustain WASH services through integrated water resources management, but also through protection of the environment, because many of these WASH facilities in many situations they don't provide sustainable services because of the environment being degraded. Next. So what are the emerging issues as we implement this framework? Overall, we note that the resources we need, really, what we have is not enough to meet the demand, so we still have resource gaps. To optimize, expand, and improve on existing WASH infrastructure, the demand is overwhelming. So right now, as part of our response strategy, we are having a broad fundraising strategy and advocacy so that we can attract as many partners as possible, support improvement of the infrastructure. We are also looking at the vulnerable families not being able to pay for the services, and yet these services have to be maintained by utilities who supply the water. So right now we are looking at having prepaid meters where tokens are are provided, as opposed to having cash subsidies for the vulnerable families. And of course, we're also looking at the issues of hygiene promotion. We are trying to harmonize public health and WASH community extension work so that we can integrate what is being done by the Ministry of Health under the village health teams with what is being done by the WASH extension services. And finally, we are also seeing an absence of water for production so that the refugees can engage in productive work. We have been focusing mainly on drinking water. And right now we want to bring in the livelihood component so that we can integrate it in the WASH so that the refugees can actually engage in productive work as they get resources to be able to pay for these services. I want again to end by thanking UNHCR for supporting and collaborating with the Ministry of Water and Environment to make sure that this framework is put into operation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tindimugaya, for that brilliant example of how the state has integrated this nexus, but also a good mix of some of these WASH approaches that we have, subsidies, meters, tokens, and how that all works towards this nexus. My next guest is Engineer Elsa Cervellon, who's going to give us a case study from Honduras. So Engineer Elsa Cervellon has been the director of the National Center for Social Sector Information, CENIS, in Honduras since 2011. She's a computer systems engineer with a master's degree in IT and communications management with advanced training in senior public management and electronic government. So she has led work teams in the area of technologies and information for institutions, such as the secretaries of finance, education, agriculture, and livestock. So Engineer Elsa is going to show us how humanitarian and development WASH databases were combined to build resilience faster in Honduras, but also an interesting example on mapping the path of typhoons over communities with long-term vulnerabilities. Engineer Elsa, over to you.
Thank you, Serene. Good afternoon, everyone. CENIS, the National Center for Social Sector Information, is an entity dependent on the Presidency of the Republic of Honduras. The CENIS team works to make visible the populations that are in the most vulnerable situations. We work with public sector institutions to guide the implementation of social programs and projects targeted to those who need it most. After the double emergency of COVID-19 and the last two tropical depressions that affected Honduras, CENIS worked closely with UNICEF, the WASH Group, and the National Association of Mayors in the National Prioritization tool at the community level. On the next slide, this tool is based on a community prioritization index, which considers two dimensions. The first one is community vulnerability, in which the informed risk index is taken into account as one of its components. And then criteria such as health, WASH services, and poverty criteria, among others, are added. And then the second dimension, criteria of impact by emergencies like damage to school and health centers, data about shelters, and impact on water systems, among others. The sum of both results in a prioritization index that can be calculated for each of the communities in the country, highlighting the most vulnerable. At the next slide, the tool was conceived by the UNICEF Regional Office for Latin America and required the quick task of merging databases of different sectors, and of course, data from the municipalities, detailing them by geographic location to community level, for which it required the support of expert risk management consultants and a lot of internal coordination by CENIS. And the next slide, this made it possible to observe the different levels of impact on the damage through a web tool that allows data to be sorted and filtered, as well as to be downloaded in Excel format. With more than 3,000 communities and 2,400 affected water systems, The publication of data from the prioritization matrix revealed that the departments 1, 3, 5, and 10 most affected were being served by the humanitarian response. However, 2, 4, and 6 were not being mentioned by the national press or by the humanitarian community in Honduras. And initially, only 9% of the first 100 most affected and vulnerable communities out of the 3,000 affected were being served by humanitarian WASH actors. Data management was essential to give coordination a purpose in our case. On the next slide about this tool, it's possible to highlight that the focus of leaves no one behind, since it uses the official list of all the country's community, which is why it covers the entire national territory. Evidence the most vulnerable communities, since it uses vulnerability and impact data mainly at the community level, and if not at the municipal level. Is multisectoral by definition due to its vulnerability index, which is multidimensional as we saw in a previous slide. This strong intersectoriality is the reason why in Honduras we decide to host the tool in a multisectoral entity such as CENIS. It's adjustable since more sectors can and should be added for the impact criteria. In the next slide, all administrative levels are represented, as the smallest data set is at the community level, and this is how the data is displayed on the website. The local government is at the center of the architecture, as the municipalities update vulnerability and impact criteria within 72 hours of an emergency. It promotes intersectoral coordinations, since it is a single web platform and all actors, from community leaders to donors, can have access to the same information in real time, thus contributing to evaluation, monitoring, and strategic planning. At the next slide, prioritization of interventions can be better targeted. In addition, accountability is promoted, since even if the municipalities provide the data of affectations, the actors of this sector can inform different points of view through the web platform, promoting exchanges and joint visits, which allows attract financing better. This tool promotes the humanitarian development nexus, since it uses a vulnerability index that helps development actors to build community resilience. Additionally, it uses an impact index that, combined with vulnerabilities, facilitates the response of humanitarian actors. Finally, in the last slide, this tool can be useful to consistently address the vulnerability that people face before, during, and after a crisis, and contributes to the challenge of generating the link between humanitarian aid, development, and consolidation of peace. Thank you for your attention, and especially thanks to the organizers of this event for allowing us to share, reflect, and learn from other experiences. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Engineer Elsa, for that brilliant presentation and really showing us, yes, the merits of technology in building the case for TNW. I know we're running about 10 minutes, 15 minutes late, but now I'd like to hand over to our host, Thilo, for the Q&A session. Thilo, without further ado, over to you.
Thank you so much, Serene, and thank you also from my side to the presenters. Great inputs, and we have already seen a few questions come up in the chat and in the Slido tool. So first of all, we're all longing for face-to-face meetings again. So if you would like at this point, now that we're going sort of into the discussion mode, do feel free to turn on your camera if you want, so that we can actually see some faces while we're in the discussion, if you feel comfortable with that. And then I'd like to remind you again that in the Slido tool, we'll sort of be doing two things now. On the one hand, I'll be tabling those questions that you have posted there. But secondly, you will see that at the top, if you're logged into Slido, you will see that we ask for drivers and barriers of a successful triple nexus collaboration. So at this point, also feel free to, to post there what you feel are the main drivers, the main barriers, maybe triggered through the presentations you just heard. Try to make it brief and to the point, but happy to call on some of you later if your comments do get voted to the top so that we get some interaction. And with that being said, let's take some of the questions. I saw that Arshad had already posted one question to, let me just close the window one second. Background noise. That Arshad had posted one question to Jeff about how to incorporate peace in the chat, which Jeff gratefully already answered. He also posted another question to Tim concerning, which goes along the same lines. Can you explain why peace is optional in the model that you, in the framework that you proposed, and what activities can be done what can be done to complete the HDP framework, as so far it only seems humanitarian and development. Tim, over to you to maybe quickly explain how that came to be.
Yeah, thank you, Arshad. Great question. And it's not to exclude peace at all. Basically, there's a spectrum of peace activities from a do no harm approach, which is basic conflict sensitivity, moving towards contributing to peace as a specific outcome. So what I focused on in the presentation, because we didn't have enough time to go into it, was really the option of contributing to peace as a deliberate outcome of your program. And this is generally what we're seeing working where there's sufficient time to undertake the peace building activities, and this is generally during development. It becomes a little tricky when we start to do that in a humanitarian space. There's less time, and then we start to conflict with some of the issues around politicization of aid and this type of thing. So very much the other side of the peace spectrum, or the middle to the other side, which is the do no harm and trying to do more good, is something that's very much part of the program, the prevention agenda, the agenda around preparedness as well. So it's definitely built in there. I just didn't have enough time to be able to sort of unpack it in a way that in the time frame of the presentation, but happy to take up follow-up questions on that for further clarification.
Thank you, Tim. Arshad, maybe was there anything you wanted to, I hope that answers your question. If there's anything that you wanted to reply, this would be the time to come in. Otherwise, if those of you who visited some of our events on this issue in the past will realize that the first event we actually had was just humanitarian and development. The second event we had a quite considerable panel on peace, and because in the first event it was stated that that was missing, and then feedback coming out of that second meeting for many actors was that it's so difficult for WASH now to get humanitarian and development on the same page to start with, that to some it seemed intimidating. So that's why I think Tim explained it quite well, that yeah, we're not excluding it, but thank you for those comments, and like Tim said, happy to follow up on those issues. Tim, maybe just sticking with you, there are two other questions which I think were directed to you. So let's take those questions first. One was from Omid, I think. It doesn't say to you, but he posed it at that time. There are some elements of social cohesion that result when providing WASH services in many areas affected by conflict. It's hard to capture these. What are the indicators that could be relevant? What are the tools? What methodologies? Maybe, I don't know if you want to follow up on that, and then there was a second question, which also was posed during your presentation by Francois from IHIP, but maybe I'll pick on him in a second. If Omid, if you want to come in, if there's anything to be amended to the question as you posed it, please do feel free to come in at this point. And otherwise, Tim, maybe you want to take that one.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Omid. And I also wanted to draw your attention to the chat where Frank Greaves from TIA Foundation has also posted some great work that was done on peace there. And there's a very interesting framework there that is definitely applicable. It's definitely applicable to social cohesion and others. There's a number of tools out there. I think USAID have a couple of great tools. UNICEF has tools as well on undertaking a program that is socially cohesive within a community and builds up social cohesion between communities and service providers and policymakers as well. So there's definitely frameworks out there and indicators, and very happy if some of the participants of this would like to post those into the chat if they know of them themselves, and we can also provide some of those frameworks on social cohesion as well. The question on the private sector, did you want me to answer that, Thilo?
Well, just offering, Francois, we see you, your video is on. Do you want to sort of pose that question yourself since it came from you?
Sure, do you hear me?
We hear you loud and clear.
Okay, great. Yeah, just because there is this idea that the water is, of course, an element of what we can call the blue peace, and it's a very collective good that is creating peace through the community if it's designed correctly, not only technically but also in a social aspect and respecting the groups and maybe the lands and everything. So there's a very local context to this, and there's this idea that the local privates, the engineering private sector might be, because they're part of this community and they also have the technical ability, they might be the best place to actually design what this water network should do. And it's triggering peace, because if they do collaborate all together, then it's kind of stabilizing the ground for further development. So I was wondering, so basically I'm saying it's a strong driver for the Nexus, the Triple Nexus, to have them included. But the question is, how are they included? Is this part of the roadmap of the mapping of your actors so far? That's my question. And basically, I will add something to this. Maybe the fact that there is this tool that is the business sector association that could represent this private sector. So my advice is to have this association of businesses being also included in the loop. So I kind of answer my question, but that's what I wanted to point out.
Okay, but thank you for those recommendations. Anyone have anything to add, maybe from the speaker side? Otherwise, thank you for that input, Francois. We have two questions which were posed to Martina. So Martina, prepare. We had one from Alyosha. How would and does the integration work with national strategies, i.e. are there efforts to align humanitarian and development plans? I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Alyosha, quite specific question, which I would give over to Martine.
Thanks, Thilo. I think you phrased it as just from a global WASH cluster perspective. Also, when we get to the field, what are the platforms to basically start looking at comparing frameworks, comparing from a cycle also perspective, from needs identification, aligning indicators, and all sorts of things. So I'm wondering if that's also happening in Burkina Faso at some point. Thanks.
Martina, do you have an answer for us? Are you still there? Okay. then we will hold on to that question and see if she returns at a later point. Maybe technical difficulties on her part. We'll hope she comes back. In which case, let's begin. There was a second question posed to Martina, but I guess I'll also reserve and hold that one until later, which I think takes care of most of the questions, if I'm not mistaken. Otherwise, do come in now. And then I would go over at this point to Marco Visser from WASH for Life. Do you want to pose your question? We all see it, I think, on Slido on the screen, but happy to have some interaction and to see some faces and hear some voices.
Yeah, I'm not actually sure what question you're referring to, because I didn't pose any question. I only just added some comments and.
Sorry. Yeah, that's what I mean. You wrote a comment. You made a statement that obviously at least 4 other people agreed to and posted it to the top. Sorry, not a question. Obviously, a statement from your side. Do you want to voice this? Happy to give you the floor for a minute.
No, I think just what I wanted to point out is that I think one of the barriers, although I didn't want to put it as a negative, but I wanted to put it in a positive form. So making it a driver. I think that the most important driver, other than getting all the stakeholders at the same table, is to have more flexible funding. So I think it's very relevant to have also the financing institutions, the donors, participating in these kind of events. Fortunately, we have USAID at this event, at this forum now. But I think up till now, it's very much kind of navel staring within the sector about looking at the challenges and opportunities of getting the development and relief sectors working together. But I think a huge role to play has to come from the donors, from the financing institutions. So that was my point.
Okay, thank you very much. Very clear, has come up in our past events also. So thank you for highlighting that. Looking at another comment we have here, Human from Alban. You've made 2, I think. Would you like? Can we hear you? If you would like to come in.
Yes, hi Thilo, hi everyone, and thanks again for the space, for the great sharing of information. No, I think, I mean, what we saw from and Elsa from Cenis presented it. What I think there is a general big challenge at ministries level and around Ministry of Planification, Ministry of National Institute of Statistics in the countries, where basically, I mean, all the ministries have their different ways of codification. So basically, I mean, there is a wealth of information, but you cannot merge it. And as WASH people, we need to merge the information. We need to understand what is the health status, what is, you know, where are people, if people are in shelters, what is the vulnerability or the poverty index of the communities, of the municipalities, and so on. So we need to understand this vulnerability at community level. We need many information from different sources, and it's very challenging to. You can get them from the different ministries, but then you need to integrate them. So I think this is, I mean, data is definitely a big challenge on the development side, and also on the emergency side, where we also need to better work with like national disaster agencies, so that when they do evaluations, when mayors do evaluation, municipalities do evaluation, they do it in a digital way, you know, in a standardized form, so that we don't have like duplication of evaluation, or we just don't know how to match one evaluation form and name of a community with anything in the national list, because it doesn't match. It's not. So I think, yeah, data is a very big challenge, and it can be fixed quite quickly, because in Honduras we kind of glued together everything like within a month, but it took obviously a lot of energy. And the most important is how do we keep it stable? How do we keep this data sharing of the ministries, of the NGO partners, of the humanitarian actors together, so that the next emergency, we just have to, everybody is already ready, everybody knows what tools to use, and all the updates just agglomerate into one single space where everybody has access to the information, because it's another big challenge. Most of the time in coordination meetings, everybody comes with its own piece of information, and it's very hard to understand from a donor perspective or a government or an NGO what is the global, I mean the overall perspective. So when everybody uses the same tool and can visualize the information from one single tool, then we all come at a coordination meeting and we all have the same level of information. So coordination is even faster and easier. So yeah, just to make it short. Yeah, sorry. Thanks, Tila.
No, thank you so much for your points. Very relevant and clear as you've just put it. I don't think we have Martina back on. I don't know if there are any colleagues of hers or that know the program or would be able to answer those questions that were posed to her. If there are, do feel free to come into the. Okay. Otherwise, I would turn back to the panelists, or to the, not panelists, but to our speakers before, and just wondering if you have any further advice that you have from your experience on encouraging actors to engage in this triple nexus collaboration. Do any of you want to have any thoughts concerning that question or want to come in here? Yes.
Yes.
Please.
Yes. Just maybe a few comments from my side. I think there was an issue regarding the statistics, the information within different government agencies not communicating with each other, but also the information not being available, and also the information held by the partners not starting with that of government. To me, I think for us from Uganda, we have realized that previously, as a government, we didn't even know what the humanitarian development partners were doing. But when we created the coordination platforms, then we realized that we need each other. And at that point, we are harmonizing our data collection formats. We are harmonizing the information we have in our databases, but it's also facilitating data and information sharing. Oftentimes, when you go to somebody and you say, give me data and information without somebody knowing why it is needed, I think sometimes this is not shared. But I think the collaboration platforms that are created facilitate running, facilitate exchange. Maybe some government agencies don't have the capacity to probably establish databases and they can be supported. So I can really summarize it in a way that collaboration and coordination will get all of us to understand each other's weaknesses, each other's strengths, and we try to put those capacities together to get the best. The other issue which was raised, I think, on how the Nexus approach provides answers to issues of water resources depletion. I think when you look at humanitarian agencies, they are really dealing with the life or death. They don't have time even to look at sustainability. But when you bring in the development aspect, development partners, development work is looking at the long term. So you are able actually to address the depletion through the development angle, which ordinarily would not be addressed by humanitarian agencies because they are really on quick fixes and they don't have time really to spend looking at the long term. So to me, I'm looking at sustainability and controlling depletion of water resources as being addressed through bringing the humanitarian and development aspects together. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective. That's great.
Dr. Elsa, if you have anything to add, do feel free to come in and to complement those statements in a second. I saw Martina is now back, so maybe let's take those two questions and then see if any of our other speakers have another statement to make. Martina, great that you're back. We had two questions that were posed to you. I hope you see them in Slido. I'll read them out to you. So the first was by Aline Hubert from group URD. How can the Nexus approach provide an answer to the issue of water resources depletion? Dr. Callas just also took reference to that question, I think. It says in some areas we talk of a 20-meter drop in the water table in 10 years. The arrival of the IDPs makes the situation worse. And there was a second question posed by Alyosha. How does the integration work with national strategies? We also touched upon that briefly, but yeah, those are the two questions posed to you.
Yes, thank you, Thilo. I see the questions. There was also a third question on the chat regarding Danida funding.
Perfect. So please take those and reply.
Thank you. So for the water depletion problem, I think it's really important to work together with the national authorities, especially the water ministry and the water basin agencies where they're available, to really address this issue. And what is also very important is for the humanitarian stakeholders to have all the information which is available regarding water resources availability and the risk of over extracting water resources. So what we are trying to do in Burkina Faso to address this issue is we have launched a study which is not aimed at producing any new knowledge, but it's a bibliographic review of all the different hydrological studies that exist. But specifically focused on the towns which are hosting a majority of ADPs. And so once this information is available, we really want all the humanitarian NGOs to be aware of the existing information on water resources, so that they can see whether there are some challenges of over utilization of resources, and also to really orient them on the best areas where there is more availability of resource, so they can drill the boreholes on those areas rather than other areas. So that's what we're trying to do here. But of course, it's not easy, and we need to work together with national authorities. So this study is really endorsed by the water ministry. And the question on the integration of strategies, it's also very important. So we are trying a little bit at the water level, at the level of the WASH sector, but I think that this integration really needs to be done at a higher level between, you know, the humanitarian HRP and the which is multi-sector, of course, and all the development documents like strategies, which are also multi-sector. Every country has a development strategy, which is maybe 5 years, lasts 5 years usually. So what I suggest is that also in places where there are protracted crises, that we really move forward to multi-year HRPs, so that we can align the timing with the national strategies, because the timing issue is really a challenge. When your planning is based on different time frames, it's difficult to coordinate operationally. So it's better to align on the same time frame. And for the WASH cluster, we are trying to work with the WASH ministry in order to institutionalize the Nexus, which means kind of revisit all the water strategies to make sure they have a component on preparedness and you know, preparedness to crisis, so that they really integrate this aspect in their own strategies. Can you still hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay. So the third question on Danida funding, they were asking whether I can provide some more detail on that. So actually, a funding that was given to UNICEF for the WASH section of UNICEF for them to implement a Nexus project firstly, it was a 1-year funding, but then it was renewed for a 2nd year. And it was really addressed to the specific crisis affected areas, but with the Nexus kind of approach. So with the different phases of intervention, first really emergency intervention, followed by like building resilience intervention, and then development intervention in the same area. And it was a total of $6 million approximately.
Okay, thank you for
and
those.
this was thanks to all this, advocacy that has been done also by the WASH cluster and by the UNICEF team, of course, as well, together with me.
Okay, thank you very much for those answers to the questions posed. Dr. Elsa Serrion, I think you had thanked Alban for his reflections, so I think maybe you're fine with comments from your side. Otherwise, this would be your time if you would like to come in one more time. And then we have
reflection from the experience of Honduras. We believe that it is very important to have tools that can make the picture of damages in the midst of emergency visible and quickly. This is key to be able to organize a timely response. Just that. Thank you, Tilo.
Okay, thank you for that closing remark from your side. I think we've picked up on almost all the comments that we have in the discussion tool. I see one more comment by John Oldfield. John, we don't have much time, but I know you can always make points quite precisely and to the point. Would you like to come in, John?
Hey, Tilo, thank you. And good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I think my comment is pretty self-explanatory. I'm super interested in how we can actually operationalize peace using WASH as a means to that, up that humanitarian and development ladder. And the traditional peace builders are missing from this conversation. And we need to better communicate with them so that they know the tools that they have to work with, and they can feed back in their diplomacy skills up and down that ladder throughout the process for a more sustainable, resilient, WASH capacitated peace, particularly in regions like the Sahel. Thank you.
Excellent, John. Thank you for that advice to all of us. And with that, I think we've done a good job of capturing your comments, of answering the questions. And I would hand over to Serene to round up our discussion and to close the event with some final remarks.
Thank you, Tilo, and thank you to all our presenters, participants, and panelists and Tilo for moderating the Q&A session. So what's next? A couple of things. So first, we're going to move towards a more formalized collaboration between the Global WASH Cluster and SWA, which means that we'll be seeking to create a platform for interested actors to get involved in. So I'm already seeing in the chat that there's quite a bit of networking that has taken place during this session. So that's excellent. And it would be great for you to let us know and please voice your interest if you'd like to be part of this particular working group. And with the help of this group, we will go ahead and publish the WASH Triple Nexus framework in a short, practical, usable document. And we do hope that we will have more series of these kinds of webinars where we'll be inviting as well others to share their experiences from the world, really, on TNW. And I think, John, yes, you do have a very strong point there to have more of the diplomats and peace builders on board. So thank you to all of you. I think special mention for our participants from Afghanistan that managed to join us today under the current situation. Thank you. And we pray that things turn out for the better. And without further ado, thank you, Tilo. Thank you, Tim. And thank you to all those that have organized it. And please have a pleasant afternoon and evening. Feel free to get in touch with us if you require further details. And we are looking forward to your active participation in this working group. Thank you.
Thank you, Serene. Bye-bye, everyone. Very happy to hear your voices to say goodbye in your local language.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.
Arrivederci.
Hasta pronto.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Todos.
Ciao, ciao.
Au revoir.
Moin.
Kwaheri.
Auf Wiedersehen. Ciao.
And I see a comment, we will try to share presentations. We'll make the video available hopefully soon. And yeah, thank you everyone for joining.